Hello and welcome to this week's Rugby League Back Chat. It's been a busy old week in the world of Rugby League, so plenty for us to get stuck into today. I'll introduce you to our three guests first. The publisher of League Weekly, Danny Lockwood, John Davidson, a freelance Rugby League reporter, and League Express feature writer, Richard de la Riviere. Thanks for joining us, lads. I want to get stuck in first and foremost to Wigan, because it's been a funny old week for them as well. They got the points back after the salary cap punishment was relaxed after the independent tribunal, but then suffered a defeat, a rather disappointing defeat late on in the week to Huddersfield. Danny, I want to start with you first. Let's go to the actual fact that they've got the 2 points back. Yep. The whole procedure's been thorough, long-winded, however you want to describe it. What are your thoughts on the fact that they've actually got the points back?
I think that was the right call, personally. I think that once you dig into the detail of the salary cap and all of the intricacies of it, it is not as straightforward as we'd all like to think it is. I think it's clear that there's been a technical breach. I think that one of the problems that Wigan had is that they were a little bit slow in how they played along with the inquiry into it. That notwithstanding, and given how historic this is and how long it's taken to come to light, I think one, that's a shame and it doesn't reflect well on our administration of the salary cap. But two, I don't think it would have been proportionate to really impact on this season's league table. But the way that Wigan's are playing, it might not anyway. And it's at least some light relief out of a really pretty blessed month for them when nothing much has gone right.
John, I mean, they've got the points back. Does it not look a little bit silly now that the points were taken off them, then they're giving them back? Does it not just make it, as a sport, look a little bit daft?
Yeah, I agree. I think what was the breach was around £15,000-17,000. Not really massive, and I think it was accidental. It wasn't sustained. Not like they had a second set of books or anything like that. So taking the points and giving them back, in a matter of a couple of weeks, it isn't a good look for the sport. But I think we, as Danny said, we do need to look at the salary cap and how it's looked at, how it's audited, because it's supposed to be a live salary cap, but there doesn't seem to be much scrutiny on what clubs are actually doing.
Well, Richard, Karen Morehouse at the RFL has spoke about this and contemplated whether it should be a bit more black and white. If you do break the salary cap, there is a fixed penalty. Can we do that? Is that realistic? Is that something the sport should look at?
Well, if you compare what they've done to, say, Cronulla Sharks, it doesn't even begin to compare. I mean, that's a very, very serious breach what they did. I mean, they set up a new company to pay players through that. I mean, Wigan, it's just not much more than an admin error, really, when you compare the amount. So I think that would be a bit harsh. I'm glad they got the points back, but it is a bit of a PR disaster, like you say.
And I think
especially when it was right at the start of the season, when they took it off them.
And I think also the fact that it's Wigan.
Yeah.
Given how lively a sport we have and how much people like to jump up and down on the big boys. Yeah. Wigan, particularly Leeds as well. I think there was a little bit of tub thumping going on in that respect. I think you do have to have a statutory system which is open to redress, and this is what's happened there. So I think the system has worked. It probably gave some Wigan fans a nervous few weeks while they were waiting to hear if they'd get it back. But, okay, we're done. We move on. We learn lessons.
That said, though, it's still a salary cap breach, John. So, end of the day, they broke the laws, did they not? Surely they should be put, whether it should be a point, I don't know. But it does seem to me that if you break the salary cap, you've committed a crime.
Yeah, I think you fine them. I think the interesting thing is it the third breach that they've had in sort of 10, 12 years? I mean, that's something that you look, if you have a repeated offender, then I think you come and look, if you go over the cap next year or in the next 5 years, it's an automatic points deduction, whether it be an admin or not, because obviously they have had issues before, and that to me is quite worrying. I mean, you look, Rich mentioned Cronulla, I mean, you look at, say, Melbourne, who were systematic rorting. Since then, they've played to the line as close as could be, and that's how it should be, because they had premiership stripped off them.
Would it not help if we did have some transparency, though? Because one thing the sport lacks generally is transparency.
Well, yeah, but I don't know how you affect that. I'm sure if we all sat over Karen Morehouse's shoulder at Red Hall and looked at it, we'd see just how complicated and difficult it is. And so, we've wrapped it up. I think we move on. I think if we can get caught doing it again, accidentally or not, then, it's a suspended sentence. It hasn't been absolutely wiped out. They're on notice. So, and I think that personally, I think that's fair.
As you alluded to, it's probably for the best that they did get the points back, because they don't look capable of earning many points themselves at the minute, Richard.
They could have played till 3 a.m. I don't think they'd have beaten Huddersfield. That was appalling. I'll tell you what, one thing that is the case is that they've lost a lot of very good players and a very good coach in recent years, and they've got the kids coming through their system to offset a lot of those losses, and it doesn't hurt them as much as it might hurt other clubs, but it's caught up with them now. I was a little bit bored the other day, so I came up with a team of ex-Wigan players who are going around at the moment, and I think they would probably beat the current Wigan team. So Tompkins, Charnley, Tompkins, Gelling, Tierney, Hampshire Smith, Taylor, McIlroy, Dudson, Bateman, Hughes, Sutton. I think they'd probably beat the current Wigan team. Yeah, Sean Wayne coaching them.
They've got to be careful with the salary cap.
Well, I'm sure that might be a bit over the cap, but they've lost, for whatever reason, they've lost very good players. Some of them they've let go, some of those players have maybe gone and the club haven't wanted them to go. But I remember quite a few years ago when Leeds were really dominating, they would often let good players go. But I don't think there was the quality among the other teams to take advantage of that. And Leeds had a habit of letting a few good players go but still winning the trophies. I think there's too many good teams now that have overtaken Wigan. And if they don't keep losing quality, it has to catch up with you.
I think John Bateman was a massive loss to them. Probably more so than Sam Tompkins, because I think Zach Hardaker was their best performer the other night. I thought he was very good, and I think he'll grow into it. And Bateman, to me, just typified that sort of Sean Wayne-like mongrel spirit that Wigan had. And I think in previous seasons, especially being at home at the DW, they would have found a way to scrap the way past a very good Huddersfield side, a much improved Huddersfield side, by the way. But I noted that missing. I thought that Sean O'Loughlin, for a guy as iconic and as talismanic as he is, just was way off it. And I you'd like to think, for the sake of the comp, that it is a blip, that they'll find their way out. They've got enough class and they've got enough experience for all the kids. They've still got a lot of quality in there. And I think that, Adrian Lamb says he was puzzled by it. I think a lot of people will be. I think we'll see a comeback from that.
The issue is, John, they've lost John Bateman, they've lost Ryan Sutton, Sam Tompkins has gone. The talk is increasingly that George Williams is off to the NRL at the end of the season, and there's uncertainty over the coach because Sean Edwards doesn't seem very committed to this coaching gig that we all thought he was supposed to be taking next year. So would it be going too far to say this is a club that has major issues at the minute? Is that a bit too extreme so early on in the year?
I think they definitely have issues. I think the talk seems to be that the owners are cutting back on the off-field staff and the resources that the coaches have. That's why Sean Wayne decided to go. And obviously, I think Sean Edwards, whether he's wavering or not, maybe he's realising the hand he will be dealt next year in terms of signings, in terms of off-field staff. I think he's publicly said he wanted, two experienced assistant coaches when Sean Wayne only really had the one previously. So there are definitely issues. I think the George Williams one is a really interesting one because he's a Wigan junior, come through the system. I think they are getting a transfer fee, so you can look at it as smart business, but the supporters will not be happy. And I think they'll expect a big signing to replace someone, an England international, one of the best halfbacks in the comp.
And if you really, to get to the nitty-gritty, if you look at the crowds have gone down for whatever, and gone down quite dramatically over the years, which naturally is why they might be needing to cut down on resources. So why, Richard, do you think that's the case? And more to the fact, what can Wigan do to try and turn that around? Because there was the talk, obviously, that people didn't like the way Sean Wayne played rugby. It was very effective. Defensively, Wigan was super, but that was the claim that it wasn't always the greatest to watch. Well, Adrian Lamb said he was going to bring, flair and excitement.
I thought Danny summed it up well in his paper yesterday. He said that the number of people who've got watching them are dwindling, and those that are watching them are booing them. I mean, it wasn't good, was it? 10 down to 10,000 now.
Yeah, I mean, the Thursday night kickoffs are always an issue. You're going to have that. It's a school night at this time of year for kids. I think, and I know what you mean about the Sean Wayne situation in terms of the type of rugby played. Listen, fans will support winning teams. That's the bottom line on that one.
But why did the crowds go down then?
Well, there are a lot of factors at play here, and when the game was, I don't know what the weather was like in Wigan the other night. I think there is a general malaise when it comes to attendances across the sport. This isn't specific to Wigan, by the way.
It's not specific to Rugby League,
and I know Rob Elson was. I don't know. You'll find other sports where they're crowing about how successful it is. But I think it was interesting to see Rob Elliston pumping out the fact that Sky viewing figures are up significantly the first sort of 4 weeks, or the first few weeks of the season. Well, there's a reason for that as well, because of course they top loaded the actual fixtures for the first 2 or 3 weeks, so that you were getting big clashes, so that you're going to get a good viewership. So as much as you can cheer that, I don't think the clubs make a single penny out of the fact that Sky get more viewers. What they get it from is bodies through the gate. That is a problem. That is something that I understood Rob Elson came into the sport to address. So far, and it's only early days, of course, not so good.
So should Wigan be worried about the season? Because ultimately Warrington had a slow start to last year.
Well, but, I mean, I think I was on Backchat last June or July, and Wigan were in the middle of an absolutely massive crisis. Wayne had said he was leaving. They were getting thrashed by everybody, and 2-3 minutes later they won the grand final. No, they shouldn't be worried at all. Maurice Lindsay last week was saying that them and Leeds will definitely get into the 5. I don't agree with that, but I don't think it's the end of the world if Wigan were to have 1 or 2 seasons where they just have to rebuild and replace some of those players that I mentioned. I don't think it's the end of the world. They're hardly going to be sort of bottom 2 or 3.
Well,
they're in a situation like Leeds, aren't they?
Well, let's move on to Leeds. What is going on there? They can't stop conceding points. They look like they've started games really well. Started really well against Wakefield. Started really well against Hull. Comprehensively beat. John, what's your take on what's going on at the Rhinos right now?
I think really they've put off a rebuilding phase that they've never had for quite some time. I mean, I think since 2004 they've won however many grand finals and titles. They've been the most successful club in England, and I think the 2007 grand final was a bit of a surprise, a bit of a going against the grain, and they've sort of probably held on to a lot of players who are too old, that they haven't had a clean out. They've tried to sort of address by throwing a load of money at 3 players, but I think the issues are much more systemic there. I think David Ferner needs a lot more time, and the worrying thing is just a lack of resilience. That their defence is horrible, and also I think that the halves partnership isn't one that's going to work personally. So there are big things to solve there.
Well, it's interesting that you say that about the Leeds halves and about Leeds throwing a load of money. The big 3 that they've brought over from the NRL. I just wonder now, with the benefit of hindsight, and especially considering Hull KR's victory against Wakefield, just how much Gary Hetherington might wish he'd tried to keep Danny Maguire on for the extra 2 years, because Maguire is, the fulcrum of everything good at Hull KR, based also around the fact that he's got probably one of the shrewdest coaches in the game right there. But you look at that Leeds midfield, it didn't function at all for me last year. So far, I know it's early days, it hasn't shown encouraging signs, and yet the value of keeping someone who is so Leeds Rhinos through and through, like Danny Maguire was, and probably at heart still is, just I don't think can be overstated.
Yeah. Well, there's Mitch Garbutt as well. I mean, I would imagine David Ferner would have turned up at Leeds looking forward to working with him, and then they discovered he's gone to Hull KR.
I think on Maguire, I mean, he's like a Jonathan Thurston or a Cooper Cronk. They just get better with age. That halfback.
But there's so few good halfbacks around.
Exactly.
Super League doesn't produce top quality halfbacks.
Does it purely come down to recruitment, Danny? Because over the years, you mentioned Danny Maguire. If you look at last season, a lot of people were saying there were a lot of players in that squad that weren't Leeds Rhinos players. Well, I don't think they were talking about Ryan Hall and Joel Moon when they left. Mitch Garbutt goes. Yep. He's been phenomenal at Hull KR. Jimmy Kynhorst has done okay as well. The players they've brought in haven't set the world alight yet.
Leeds kind of identified 4 or 5 years ago the following generation of players that were going to be the next Barrow and Maguire, that were going to replace Sinfield. And we're talking about players like Liam Sutcliffe and Stevie Ward,
Jordan Lilly.
And there are a lot of these lads who were talented, but that doesn't always translate into superstardom. Leeds got lucky, very much like Manchester United got lucky with their class of '92. You can't plan for those things. They are organic. There is there's a bit of stardust sprinkled from above, and right now that is missing from what the
Leeds always recruited sensibly, though. They had that one blip where they signed Mullins and Clyde, and that went horribly wrong. And that reminds me now of the players they've signed this year. They've brought big names in, but just like back then in 2001, they've recruited from a position of weakness. And they were a bottom 4 team last year. You can't just expect to add 2 or 3 star players in the NRL and expect to become a top 4 team. I remember they had a terrible year in '96, and they actually signed a lot of very average looking players from teams like Sheffield and Keighley, and it worked. And I think maybe they should have perhaps gone for a few grafters, and they'd probably be defending a lot better.
I think that some of the expectation is a bit unrealistic. You can't, in a salary cap sport, and I think the competition is a lot more even now, you can't expect to be in a final every year, or you shouldn't. You look at the rise of Hull, the last few years, the rise of Wakefield, Catalans are spending in a huge amounts of money. There's going to be a big club that slips down.
Leeds and Wigan have both overachieved so much. Yeah. They can't expect to have another decade like they've both had.
Danny, they play London this week. It's a big game, isn't it, all of a sudden?
Yeah, well, that's it's much needed relief, I think. But I tell you what, and I don't know if we're going to come down to it later, but I really, really, really put a lot on the shoulders of coaches. Tim Sheens, I've mentioned at Hull KR. I think what Ian Watson achieves week in, week out with Salford is incredible. And Danny Ward, the same at London. So I don't think London have a lot of consecutive wins in them. I think their resources are too thin and too strapped for that. But I think that they can identify games where they're thinking, we're going here with a scrapping chance.
Well, they wouldn't have gone to St Helens thinking they had a chance, but will they go to Headingley?
Well, that's what I'm saying. If it ain't there week in, week out, can Danny Ward get them up? Yes, we've seen that he did the week before against Wigan. So, I still think that great leaders and great coaches are invaluable in this sport, and I don't think we've got as many as we'd like to think.
Thanks, Danny. Well, plenty more for us to speak about during the last 2 parts of this week's Rugby League Back Chat. Up next, I should say, the 1895 Cup played after the Challenge Cup final. What do we think about that? We'll find out next on Rugby League Back Chat. Welcome back to this week's Rugby League Back Chat. On the agenda in this part, we're going to start by talking about the 1895 Cup because, gents, the first round has now taken place. We know who'll be playing who on the road to Wembley for the teams outside of Super League. Well, they can get there in the Challenge Cup, really, can't they? But realistically, this is the best chance. What has come to light is the fact that it's going to take place, the final, after the Challenge Cup final. Now, everyone, I think, naturally thought this was going to be a curtain raiser, but seemingly not. Richard, what's your take on the fact that it's been played after the Challenge Cup final and not before it?
It's a bit of a strange one, isn't it? I'm not 100% sure what the reasons are. I do remember in '97 when we had the Silk Cup plate between Hull Kingston Rovers and Hunslet. That was before, and that worked. It just worked really well. There were a lot of people in the ground when that game took place, and Stanley Jean scored a hat-trick. I remember it pretty well. And it was such a good occasion on its own, and then for some reason it got scrapped. 20 odd years later, we've brought something similar back. It's really exciting. My team, Workington, might get to Wembley. I remember going to Hunslet in the quarter final in '97 because it was like the road to Wembley, and it is very exciting for clubs who are going to be in it. But that is the only fly in the ointment. It's whatever the reason is, it's a bizarre one because after the Challenge Cup final, you'll have the lap of honour, you'll have everything, and supporters will be leaving, and I think there'll just be a lot fewer people in the ground to watch the 1895 Cup final.
Danny, it does seem like an odd decision.
I'm not sure. Listen, I think we'll find out, depending on how well it works. I'm ambivalent about it. I can understand some of the rationales behind it because I think if with respect to what 97 was it?
Yeah.
If my memory must be going. I do think you want a decent crowd, and let's face it, this is not about whether the crowd's in before or after. It's about getting bums on seats at Wembley for whatever. Now, if we had another water splash, if we had, remember the downpour in the Leeds final a couple of years back. If you've already played a full-on game, because we're not talking about the under-11s here, we're talking about 26 big pieces of beef potentially tearing up your landmark surface ahead of the big game. I don't think we want that. I think we want the spectacle as pristine as it can be of the Challenge Cup final. Playing it afterwards, I get the point about a lot of people will head home, a lot will. But this is Wembley weekend and a lot don't. So I think there would still be a good crowd in there. And I just want, I just want those numbers to be up crucially, no matter when or why they play it, before or after.
Will it affect the crowd though, John? Because at the end of the day, a 5:30 kick-off, that makes it harder on public transport for the people watching that game to get back and get a train back up north. Is that not an issue that needs to be thought about?
I think it is. I think you've got to have it as a curtain raiser. I think it's, obviously there's broadcasters to take it and what Wembley want, but I think it's not a good decision. You see the curtain raisers, World Cup final 2017, the women played before the men, so you've guaranteed a crowd for the women, and you look, as soon as full time's played, no matter what, everyone basically leaves. Most people don't stay these days for the trophy celebration. We saw that at the World Cup Challenge with the Roosters and Wigan a couple of weeks ago. So, yeah, I think at the end of the actual Challenge Cup final, there's probably going to be maybe 10,000 tops, which isn't a good look.
You see, with the Magic weekend, each day tends to end with the big fixture. So you'll have a Hull derby at the end or a Wigan Saints derby at the end, and you build up to it, and it works. So, but it's the only negative for me. I'm very excited about having an 1895 competition. I hope it's here to stay.
Absolutely. I think most people were quite positive, gave it the big approval when it first came in, because we do need to find ways to build up the crowd at Wembley, as we saw last year. But there are reasons why it's had to be played after. A lot out of the RFL's control, whether it be the broadcasters, but certainly Wembley were keen to play it afterwards. There's also the Stephen Mullaney Trophy final, and all of that history. It would be unfair to nudge that to one side. I think everyone would agree with that. But I guess the question now is how it will actually affect the crowd, how it will affect the day, because it's not going to look great, is it, if there's only 10,000 people in Wembley watching the first instalment of the 1895.
It depends who gets there, doesn't it? I mean, if you could end up with a couple of not well supported clubs who are only going to take 1,000 fans between them.
Well, Danny, who would be the best teams to have that?
You could end up with Featherstone and Halifax, who you probably think will take 10 or 15,000 between them.
If it's two clubs with a bit of a Wembley history recently, like those two, or Lee.
Bradford Bulls, you get Bradford there, all of a sudden, that ground will still be half full, because that will be a big day out and a big weekend out. I would like to see it kick off a little bit earlier, 5 o'clock-ish maybe, but perhaps they couldn't mess around with the Wembley kick-off time. But even so, I think it will be critical who gets there.
Who are we looking at as getting to the final? Who for you catches the eye? It's been an interesting championship season so far, John.
Yeah, it's very unpredictable, isn't it? I mean, I think Bradford, as Danny said, if they got there, they would be very well supported. I think Featherstone are really impressing under their new coach. Playing really well. I think Lee are another team that got a decent fan base and also doing quite well under John Duffy. So
York.
Well, York would have gone top, wouldn't they,
well.
if they'd beaten Rochdale by a few points?
If the game had been played. That's a different matter.
But who would have thought? Well, they were the best.
I think we all agree there's plenty to be enthused about with it, isn't there? And so, as I say, I'm in a perfect world, but it ain't the perfect world. So I'd just like, I'd like to wait and see on the outcome, and maybe we'll be sat here end of this year thinking, well, it turned out okay.
Well, the top of that division now is very, very good. I was remembering that last season, Matt, you did top 50 players from the Championship for the Total RL website, and I was having a look at that the other day. I think all of those 50 could go into Super League and do a job. They're all, the old system, the 3/8s, it led to a stockpiling of very good players in the top of the Championship, and when Lee finished 6th, we then saw a few of their players go into Super League and just walk straight in like they belong there. There's a lot of very good talent, and they deserve something like this. I think, chance to get to play at Wembley. But in Rugby League, unlike football, lower division teams just don't get to big finals. It's just
Well, the RFL will certainly be hoping that is the case.
Well,
if one of the Championship or League One teams makes a semi-final of the Challenge Cup, there is an issue with the scheduling then. I mean that would be the sort of thing that would happen in Rugby League, isn't it, John?
Definitely, seems to regularly. Yeah.
Well, let's move on. I think one thing that's come to light in the last couple of days has been the 2 referee system, and there is a little bit of uncertainty over this now. The job advertisement for the 2 referee executive has vanished and no longer seems to be being filled by anyone. The NRL referee Matt Chetchin, he seemingly was a shoo-in for it. He's now returning to the NRL, so he's not taking it, and all of a sudden there is now suddenly opposition from certain Super League clubs, despite everyone saying that this was agreed on. John, another funny old story that seems to take some unforeseen turns. What's going on here exactly?
I'm not sure. I mean, it seems like basically there was a a strong sort of push for the 2-ref system, particularly from Robert Elston, but a number of clubs are against it, and they seem to have won sway, and we won't see it next year. I mean, I'm probably a little bit ambivalent. I think it works really well in the NRL, speeds the game up, but in Super League is a different product, and I don't think there is the calibre of referees to actually have that. I mean, you see that from League One, the Championship, and Super League. So maybe for now, anyway, it is the right call.
Danny, if it's going to cost, it's thought that Steve Ganson told the clubs it would cost in the region of £300,000 to bring this in. Is there a better, with where the sport is at, is there places where the money could be better spent than bringing in the 2-referee system?
I don't know about that. I'm just telling you that there isn't £300,000 kicking about. What with parachute payments to failed clubs, etc., etc. And I understand the word on the street is that Leeds and Wigan, not unsurprisingly, given what we've already discussed about their approach to finances at the moment, we're a little bit resistant to it. You know, I think it's again. It's another example of our sport shooting itself in the foot, because this should have been thought through, budgeted for, and planned and executed. I'm disappointed that Matt Cechin is not refereeing in Super League. He would have been a great addition to the sport.
I think that's down to the Home Office.
That's not our fault. Well, that is not our fault, and that is, you know, and that plays the narrative that what influence do we have? Who's lobbying? You know, I'd have liked Brian Barwick, you know, to
he's a very busy man, Danny.
Oh, yeah, he's just
don't ask too much.
So, but the thing is this: it just, you know, yet another one we've kicked ourselves in the shin. But in terms of the 2-referee system, would it be better? Well, that's what we were looking at. We were having a trial phase, which would not have cost us £300,000. You know, it would have allowed Matt Cechin to have a look at it. They could have played to its strengths and weaknesses. You'd like to think by the end of the season we'll be in a far stronger financial position anyway, because Mr. Elson will have brought in lots more commercial partners. You know, so to do it when we've done it, as we've done it, again, just sends out all the wrong signals. Is it better? I'm not sure. It's a better system. I was with a friend, an Aussie coach, just last week. He's still based in New South Wales, by the way, and he loved the fact that we'd one referee for the World Cup Challenge, and he thought Robert Hicks had a blinder, and he says that's the future. I said, well,
save a lot of money.
No, I'm pleased it's not going to happen. Or it's not going to happen for now. I've never liked the 2-referee system. I don't like the video referee either, so maybe I'm just old-fashioned. But
well, it's one of those you've tried to play devil's advocate. Robert Elston wanted to bring in all these rules that have changed, and I think generally people agree that they've been for the better.
Yeah, I think
he deserves the benefit of the doubt on the 2 referees.
I don't think he has to do this much this soon, though. I think what he's done so far has generally worked, and I think people think that he's doing a good job so far. But no, I didn't want to see this happen. I think the thing with referees though in rugby league is it does highlight the fact that they've got so much more to do than say a football referee who just sort of ambles around blowing for handballs and fouls, and they don't really have to do much more than that. In rugby league, the referee really dictates the pace of the game. But I'm not someone who wants the game to be as fast as possible. I think Elston has speeded the game up a bit, and I'm happy with that. But I don't want to see us go down this route. And like you say, that there aren't the quality of referees here.
Well, we've seen Chris Chester this week criticise a referee, but more to the point, if you do 2 referees, they all have slightly different interpretations of incidents, don't they? What happens in the ruck? So does the game then get officiated in 2 different ways? I mean, you watch a lot of NRL, you'll know that.
I think it's hard when you don't have a video ref at every game, because obviously in the NRL they have a video ref at every game. They're all mic'd up, so they're getting instruction from the box, from the bunker. In Super League, I'm not sure how that would work in a non-televised game without a video referee. So you have the pocket ref, you have a dominant ref who does control, but it does seem to clean the rucks up. There's less of sort of... I agree.
I do think that is one critical part of our game at the minute that does need cleaning up, and that is what 2 referees would play to. It isn't as though you've got 2 guys with whistles having a competition with each other. It is about getting all over that ruck and making sure that we're not getting situations where, in the Wigan Huddersfield, Wigan Huddersfield game, you had guys staying down, sort of looking to the ref. Oh, that was a crusher tackle ref. Oh, that was a chicken wing ref. I think if you do have the lesser experienced referee, as happens in the NRL, the junior ref, just a presence at that ruck it can't hurt. I just don't want to see suddenly whistle after whistle after whistle because some kid who really isn't up to it is imagining offences that really are.
Do we need to come up, Richard, with stronger sanctions for players who are seen effectively to be trying to con the referee? I think a lot of coaches and players have come out and said, now, you know who the players are, we can see who they are, but no one wants to call anyone out. Do we need to start throwing the book at these people who are cheating?
Well, when the Huddersfield player got caught out a few weeks ago with that dive,
it was Aaron, who to be fair to him, is one of the most honest players in the game, and it was out of character. But that said, he got the book thrown at him, but surely that needs to be more consistent, doesn't it?
Well, yes, it does, but we need to try and stamp it out. But I mean, football's never managed to get on top of diving. Yeah. You know, you can humiliate these guys, you can call them cheats, you can ban them, and yet if push comes to shove, if the game's, you know, on a knife edge in a big competition, players will do it. Players will cheat.
I think it's different now. Football it is part of the culture.
But I think it is in rugby league.
I think it's creeping that way.
But I think it's probably been there for longer than we'd care to admit. You know, people at the play the ball pretending they're being held down and I can't get up because they're all over. That's always existed.
You talk about being old-fashioned. I'm properly old-fashioned. I've played this game a lot of years, and actually, it's quite unbecoming of what we think our core values as a sport are, of what we're sending out as a message to kids. And I do think there needs to be, how you do it. I don't know where a video referee is in play, if he can be having a look and having a word in the referee's ear.
It's a dodgy route to go down.
It's a dodgy route to go down, Richard. But if we seek an improvement and we're not wanting to actually change the infrastructure of the game, I do think we need to do something. If we're cleaning it up.
One crackdown I'd like to see is on coaches who blame referees. I mean, it's just so boring now. I mean, I'm a big fan of Chris Chester, and like a lot of neutrals, I'm a big fan of what Wakefield are doing. But what a shame that he came out with those comments. All they had to do was score 2 tries to beat Hull KR. Yeah. They've lost 2 games this season where they had a 12.5 point advantage with the bookies. That's their fault. It's not anybody else's.
In fairness to Chris, though, if you watch that whole interview, he did compliment Hull KR. It wasn't just the ref was terrible. And I think also, I'm not advocating ref bashing, but I think you've got to allow coaches to be as honest as possible and say what they want to say. You know, if he goes above the line, then you're fine.
Yeah, but I think
I think we want our coaches to say what they think and not sit on the fence.
I would just love a coach to come along and say, I'm never going to blame referees. You know, if we lose a game, it's because we should have scored another try.
I'd like to see referees put up.
Because it doesn't make any difference.
100%. Well, why aren't they put up? I mean,
because there's this protectionist ring about them. You know, they feel the world's against them. It is. So how do you change that, Richard?
But see, I agree.
You humanise them.
I agree with that.
You give them a personality.
I agree with that.
You give them a voice. You if they want to, if they're comfortable, because not all of them would be. But Ben Thaler would, I suspect. James Child would. You know, they'd come out and say, listen, this is what I saw, and that's why I called it. Yeah. And once you do that, you take the sting out away from the haters.
I remember being at a game many years ago. It was the opening game of the centenary season back in the mid-90s, and there was about 8 new rules. Every season starts off with a load of new rules. So there I was at Workington. It's Workington v Wigan. It's live on Sky. And Stuart Cummins was refereeing, and he got more abuse than I think I've ever seen. And I remember going home that night, watching the video and thinking, he got every decision correct. Yeah. And from that moment, I've never been part of a crowd that shouted it, because they do get more right than you think.
Yeah, well, I agree. Well, let's wrap that up there. Coming next on Rugby League Backchat, we'll be talking about ongoings in France. It was rather an eventful week there, plus much more. Super League and Championship talk right here on Rugby League Backchat. Welcome back to the final part of this week's Rugby League Backchat. We're going to head over to France because, gentlemen, there was some rather interesting activity going on over there this week. We'll start in Perpignan. John, Catalans 0, Salford 46. What on earth happened there?
Yeah, arguably the result of the season. I think Salford would have gone there confident, but maybe looking to edge a win, but absolutely battered Catalans. Just a fantastic performance. Jackson Hastings, Jake Bibby, Robert Louis. Every Salford player. I think it really shows how well they've come on this season. And Ian Watson, just an outstanding coach.
Absolutely, I think I don't think we give enough credit to these guys, and Ian Watson's one of the proper nice guys in the sport. He's had to work with all the dramas that Salford have had repeatedly over recent seasons. And to reference what we were talking about before, in terms of players who we might not naturally identify as being Super League class, they all look like it when they play like that. Hastings, what a find that guy has been. And I'm pleased that Salford were able to, lock him up. It's great to see a half that will both take on the line but lay deep. He brings the best out of Robert Louis, and I just thought it was a delight to see. But conversely, you've got to ask, how is Steve McNamara winding these guys up when they look like they've had a week on the beach? Because they get a great win over Warrington, who we all fancied to go there, but then suddenly you've got players of the class of McAlorum and Tompkins, guys who should be natural leaders. Just going missing in action, and the fact that Tony Gigo and one or two others might be missing, it isn't enough of an excuse for me. But absolutely, I was delighted for Salford.
Richard, look, I think there's a lot of coaches you could look at in Super League, Championship League One, pound for pound, doing phenomenal jobs. Is Ian Watson at the top of that list, above anyone else, with what he's done at Salford, given the circumstances and the card he's been dealt with? Basically?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we mentioned Chris Chester before and the job he's done. What they've got in common is that they're both putting winning teams out there without spending money on superstars and being right at the top of the salary cap. But we know there's a pattern, don't we, that great players don't necessarily make great coaches. Ian Watson was a very talented scrum half, but he never played for the big boys. And maybe that's been a good grounding for him. I remember him briefly at Workington. He was very good. He played in the Wales team that pushed Australia all the way in that World Cup semi-final in 2000. Wherever he's gone, he's always done a good job. And for as long as he's been at Salford, they've always impressed. But it's not just Jackson Hastings though. I mean, he's pound for pound been one of the best overseas signings in Super League, the way that he's improved them. But Nye Levels,
fantastic.
Not many better British fullbacks than him. You mentioned Jake Bibby. A mate of mine said he played like Gene Miles. I mean, just absolutely unbelievable. You look at his stats. You look at his stats. They were phenomenal, weren't they?
You look at Daryl Alford. They plucked him from League One.
Watson has put together a very, very good team. And I made the point in part one. When we talked about Leeds, that you don't just have to go out and sign superstars. They've signed players. They've fit them in there. They're just a proper team. And Ian Watson is an excellent coach. Yeah,
because if you look at Gil Dudson, came from Winners, who were relegated. Greg Burke.
Well, that team of ex-Wigan players I read out, there's a few on there. Yeah, we've got a few ex-Saints players as well.
As for Catalans, John, look, again, it seems a bit daft trying to make too much out of anything after 5 rounds, but to lose 46-0 home, that's very out of character. And given the spending that's going on, I would love to know who deals with their contracts, because they need a pay rise with getting Sam Cassiano under their salary cap. But it's a little bit concerning that you've got players like Sam Tompkins in that side, and he's on the receiving end of a result like that. They were supposed to be going in to ensure that soft underbelly that's been there for years wasn't there anymore. They
are the ultimate yo-yo team, and I think in terms of the salary cap, I think the beauty they have is the taxes are a lot lower in France, so it's quite appealing. Players earn more through that way, and also a lot of those French local players are on very small contracts, so they can throw big money at players from the NRL. But yeah, they're trying to change the culture, particularly with that sort of Wigan core of McAlorum, Smith and Tompkins. It's going to take time. I think they're still one of those teams that has the potential to be a top 5 team, but there is no guarantees because they just can't string it together week after week.
Yeah, I'd like to see, first of all, the calculator they use for their exchange rates between what they're paying on the salaries, because I do think it raises a few eyebrows. And I'm not sure how live a French salary cap can be under a British system. But
they've taken a big risk, though, haven't they, by winning the Challenge Cup, but then changing all the spine of the team.
Yeah, but it's
the decision not to re-sign Josh.
Yeah, that is a big.
But to go back to that, they had that purple patch of about 4 or 5 weeks, didn't they, last year, Catalans? They were poor before that.
That's true.
And they were lousy after it.
And they nearly got relegated the year before.
And it does ask. I think it does speak to the culture of the club. And I'm they've never travelled well particularly, but you've always expected something better out of them at home. To see a collapse of that magnitude, I think, was to ask questions about what's going on behind the scenes. Because we talk about Sam Tompkins with all of his experience and leadership, and there was one instance late in that game, and the game had gone, but when the guy's running around to go dot the ball down behind the sticks, and Sam doesn't bother keeping him 15, 20 yards out, he's turning his back and he's having a go at guys. I don't think that is professional, if I'm honest.
Well, we'll go back to Super League in just a minute, but while we're in France, Toulouse inflicted the first defeat of the season on Toronto. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a hammer in front of 6,000 people as well. John, that was some day and some result for Toulouse.
Yeah, it was. I think Toulouse are another team that they probably didn't start the season too well, but they can beat anyone on their day. And I think people saying that Toronto wouldn't lose a game this season was a bit of a joke, really. I mean, I don't think they're that far ahead of the opposition, but great to see Toulouse pulling that sort of crowd. I mean, they've got some issues with the home stadium. They're playing at the Rugby Union Stadium. I don't know if that's a vehicle for them in the future, but for me, I think long term we have to get Toulouse into Super League. Two French teams, to have a real Catalans-Toulouse derby would be the way forward.
They need to get the ground sorted, don't they? I think everyone agrees with that, but certainly they do seem to do a lot of things right. And if they're attracting crowds of 600, Richard, that's naturally one of the box ticks that everyone looks for in this sport, what the attendances are. So they seem to be on the right track.
I didn't expect a result like that. It was similar with the 46 points, what Catalans conceded. I mean, one of my, judging by the match reports, one of my favourite players, Tyler Heppy, he came off the bench, turned the game. I think that was the League Express game changer. Tyler Heppy coming on, making a few breaks, setting up a few tries. He's a brilliant player. You look through their team. They've got a lot of very good players in there. I'd like to see them both. I think if in an ideal world, if we could have a 14-team Super League, the current 12, those two.
Let's not get too wishful.
I think one thing, Toulouse have always had that kind of a performance in them, and I think the main thing to take out of it is the fact that it does bring Toronto back a little bit to the field. It does kind of give hope for a more competitive championship season. In terms of two French teams in Super League, I'm less convinced of that. I would like to see Toronto in there in terms of making the sport generally more marketable. I still to this day don't see what added value Catalans have really brought to the comp. So I'm not sure that you could make an argument for Toulouse doing so. That all of that said, if we have a fair and equitable system of promotion and relegation and the 14-team Super League, may the best teams and the best candidates win. But of course, I think that we keep dragging this one out. But I'd like to see where New York, New Jersey, for instance, fit into that mix.
Again, don't get too wishful.
If at all, But we're talking about growing the sport. We're talking about dwindling numbers. We're talking about giving people something to market. That can't come soon enough.
I can't wait for the top five, the championship top five playoffs. There was a danger when you think maybe Toronto will have it all their own way, and maybe they still will.
Still got to win a grand final. One-off game.
Just on Toronto, though, I think Dewsbury really gave them a lesson the week before. They were so unlucky not to win that game, Dewsbury, and I think that sort of showed that they are beatable and everyone else is taking
that'll be the measure. That'll be the measure of Brian McDermott's qualities as a coach. If he can lift what is absolutely the marquee squad in the competition, but you've still got to, as we saw with Catalans, you've still got to get those guys to turn up and put their game head on, and I'm not sure that every coach can do that as well as, for instance, a Chris Chester or an Ian Watson.
You mentioned the Dewsbury game. They scraped past Dewsbury. They only just beat Lee. I think they beat Lee by 6 points. The York game was very tight. I think it was 6-0 after 68 minutes. Other than Rochdale, they've not trampled over anyone yet. Now, you look at the signings they made. Ricky Lee was a big name. They brought Darcy Lussick in mid-season. Early days, I know, but have they improved?
I think what McDermott has done, he's made them a lot tougher defensively. Obviously, under name escapes Paul Rowley, the previous coach, they were very good at throwing the ball around from everywhere, but they had that sort of inherent grubbiness. They would lose their heads, and that ultimately cost them discipline in the £1 million game and at the end of the season last year. So I think what McDermott has done is cut a lot of that out, made them a lot tougher, more disciplined side, and I think that will pay dividends long term.
Danny, before we move on, I just want to pick up on what you said about Catalans and what they bring to sport. Just to expand on that, you don't think that they bring a great deal.
It isn't that. I mean, we saw what they cost the sport with the attendance at Wembley last year. That's always a factor that you've got to weigh in. I just think that if you look at attendances, it's a lovely weekend away. It's Perpignan, recommend it to everybody. I just think that in terms of the added value that we think having an international aspect to the sport is, I'm not sure that's ever been turned into, whether it's be pounds or euros. I'm not sure that Catalans at that level have contributed as much as we hoped they would.
Richard, would you agree with that?
I was a big fan of them in their early days, but one thing they haven't done is their presence hasn't improved the French national team. They've been pretty embarrassing for too long now. But I do think you need a second team in there to do that. Otherwise, the French national team just becomes Catalan Dragons plus a handful of Championship or French Elite Championship players. And I think if the French national team then had a Super League Toulouse team to choose from, then they suddenly become a different proposition, and then they potentially give England or Great Britain a really good mid-season fixture, which the sport hasn't had for a long time.
I'm just going to quickly come back to you because the World Cup, if we just touch on this quickly, Workington, and John Dutton's confirmed there is a contingency plan in place should that stadium not be ready. I know it's an area close to your heart, Richard. Is that a concern, the fact that they've had to put a contingency in place? The stadium, they haven't started working on it just yet, have they? So is the concern up in Cumbria?
I think it would be mad if there wasn't a contingency plan in place, because the stadium hasn't been built yet. So I think the World Cup would have to have a contingency plan. Yeah. Just because John Dutton says in the article in League Express, if the absolute worst happens, then good on him. You have to have a plan in place. But as far as I'm aware, it's at the planning stage. I don't think they're behind any schedule or anything like that. So I don't think there's a problem.
Would it be a blow if there wasn't a game in Cumbria in 2021, Danny?
Yeah, I think it would, because when you look at what we had with that memorable Scotland-New Zealand game up there, when it felt like half of Cumbria came out for it. It's an event, and there's no getting away from the passion and the commitment of Cumbrian fans. And I know whether it's Dr. Kukash or whomever going on about the potential of a Super League Cumbrian side, I don't think we'll ever see it personally. But you can't get away from what that area means to the sport, and it does deserve representation on the biggest stage.
Yeah.
Everyone agree?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, just to wrap up very finally, we don't have a lot of time left, but I just want to touch on the Lions a little bit. A lot's been said this week about it being called the Lions and not Great Britain and Ireland, but more to the point, Wayne Bennett's the head coach. He's the England head coach, and there's been some criticism of that because he's naturally looking at 2021 and what England can do in that. Is there a concern that this is going to be England wearing a different jersey, John?
I think there is concern, but I think probably the Wayne appointment probably comes down to more, he's already contracted the RFL, they don't have to throw out another wage, they don't have a lot of money to spend. But in terms of selection, I think you look at the Six Nations on the weekend, England Rugby Union team, I think they had a couple of Samoans, a few Kiwis, a Tongan, a Fijian winger that everyone was raving about. This is modern sport these days, and I think sometimes in rugby league people get a little bit too precious, Gary Schofield for one, about it. That's just my opinion. But I think it will be England dominated, but we will see a couple of players from the other nations.
I thought Ben Flower's comments in League Express were very interesting, because he basically said that since Great Britain was scrapped, the Wales, Scotland and Ireland lads have had all the good fixtures taken away from them. And of course, when Great Britain was scrapped back in 2007, we had a period of a few years where all the best players from Scotland, Ireland and Wales then defected to England. So obviously England have stockpiled all the best players. That was always going to happen. If you go back to the 2000 World Cup and then the Great Britain games that followed in 01 and 02, half the Great Britain players had played for Ireland or Wales in the 2000s. So that's when the system worked. If we bring back Great Britain full time, which I'm adamant we should do, then we can make Scotland, Ireland and Wales much stronger.
Yeah. But Danny, look, I take the point, but if you look at the players who were being talked about as being in contention, Justin Holbrook said Morgan Knowles should be in contention, but he's from Cumbria. Lachlan Coote is from Australia.
I grew up with Danny Bruff's mum and dad in Dewsbury.
He was screwed over more than anybody when Great Britain was scrapped.
Absolutely, he should have been. He's Danny McBruff. Yeah. Listen, I think there will be an element of artifice about the construct of the squad, because there will have to be. Because if we are going to be committed to the Lions, and I'm absolutely 100% with Richard, I don't think this is a Lions tour, by the way. I think it's just a way of getting the jersey out there. But I'm whatever it takes for me, so I'm with that. But if it does mean that there has to be a nod of tokenism towards the makeup of the squad, well then actually I can swallow that too, because I think the bigger picture deserves it.
But nobody wants to be selected though, just because they're a certain nationality.
But who's Kane Linnett, Danny Brough would still be at the end of the season. He might have led Wakefield into the top four, into the top four, and as old as Danny is, on his day, he's as good as anybody in the game.
A few years ago, if we kept Great Britain, we would have had Danny Brough and Lee Breers as the halfbacks in the finals we played against Australia in 2009 and 2011.
But they were never good enough to make it for England. So it does come down to personality.
We don't know who's going to be fit at the end of the year either. I mean, you look at England last year, Richie Myler played for England, probably the 7th, 8th choice halfback. Would you have picked Danny Brough? I think most people would have.
We'll have to end the debate there, I'm afraid, gents, because we've just run out of time. That is pretty much all we've got time for on this week's Rugby League Back Chat. Don't forget, you can get all the information for everything that's happening on this channel by simply going to www.freesports.tv. Thanks to all of our guests. Don't forget, we'll be back next week for another edition of Rugby League Back Chat. Bye-bye for now.